I would like to go into the dialogue. And before we go into some of the other questions, one question that links to one of your end remarks, Bram, is also this is a participatory approach. We use participatory tools because they help really to get everyone's perspective on certain issues and challenges and how to move forward. And a question that also links a bit to the question that Ansuman Das um, asks is how do we, first of all, get the right people together to do this? So you have many different stakeholder groups. How do we bring them together to start this participatory approach? And in your experience, how hard is it to break inhibition, or, for example, communities to start drawing and doing rich pictures, and for sensitivities to come above water? What are your experiences in that? And just feel free also to add on after Bram.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, these are really good points. And maybe just to start with the first point, I think it's not difficult to get people started on these things, right? So I think we've been positively surprised in so many different domains where, we've started rich picturing and we come up with the most fascinating and interesting insights, right? And I think that just generally goes for a lot of participatory stuff. And this is one of the things that we've seen in many places is that in a way, a lot of participatory facilitation skills and generally just the capacity of bringing people together is so powerful, and it's underinvested in, right? So this whole idea of getting people in the room together and talking about a complex issue is already a very good starting point to getting some really interesting discussions going. And I think that's one of the things we've been always, very happy to see. And generally people, even in very sort of serious or high level positions, have been, triggered to engage with it and have been sort of expressing the fascination of what they've learned just sitting on table with a farmer or a woman leader and learning new things, right? So that's one. And I think then the other point of it is also related to that quality criteria that Jus was mentioning. I mean, inclusion and equity and getting different representatives around the table is just really crucial. And I think the strength of these approaches actually it becomes more valuable the more diverse perspectives you get around the table. So it's not easy to get different perspectives around the table, and sometimes you might sort of say, well, we need only experts or we only need people who know stuff, but actually we should be open-minded in that and sort of be searching actually for those people who have something surprising to tell, right? And who do think differently. And I think then the recommendation there is just be very open and inclusive and sort of always sort of ask yourself, can we get someone around the table who has a surprising thing to say, or someone who has an open mind but a curiosity. And thereby I think you need always those different stakeholders around the table if you want to have success there. And maybe I'll say one more thing around this is that the future, and talking about the long-term future scenarios, it adds a flavor which people find interesting and more allows for people to be more open about things. So this is why I think the notion of food systems analysis of the current situation as well as the future is crucial to combine, because when you analyze the food system together in the current situation, it's often not easy to overcome differences, right? So if you ask a business person to change their business overnight because of the problems in the food system, they won't appreciate it, right? They will say, but I need this for my income, or I need, but if you place the discussion in the future, 10 years or 20 years from now, a lot of things are suddenly possible, right? And there you can, on a deeper level, connect where you can find common ground about where you would like the system to change potentially, and there you can then come back to the current and see how can we make small steps, which opens the discussion in a new way, which I think is really important.
Great. Yeah, maybe to add from my side on that, I think there's two ways in which to also encourage this wide participation. So one is, how can you accommodate in terms of where you hold your multi-stakeholder meetings? The language that is being spoken, can we facilitate translation to local languages? I think that's a very good starting point. And the other is facilitation. So having good facilitators that can bring out those people that usually don't speak up, and make sure that their voices in small groups are heard. and that you have mixed groups, I think a lot of points can be gained there by having good facilitation, bringing out those voices that matter.
Thank you, Bram, and thank you. Yes, I wholeheartedly agree with those points, and also the realization. I think you, Bram, you said it in the beginning that it's not always about the outcomes of these tools, but it's really about the process while doing it. And the similar thing is happening in our e-course as well. As while we are reflecting on the context, that's how we learn. So we also don't expect all these perfect comments on our learning platform, because that's not what matters. It's you reflecting on it and then writing your comment and reading what others are writing. And that's where some small seeds of change are taking place. And this platform also gives us the opportunity to really connect with people you would otherwise never connect to, and really get our outside of our like our bubbles or our echo chambers, which the algorithms nowadays kind of put everyone in. And by having totally different views, some things might totally change, and some ways of thinking might totally change. And that's, I think, the strengths of also of organizing these meetings where stakeholders who otherwise won't meet try to exchange ideas and think about future scenarios. Brings me to my next question, and often a critique on food systems approaches. Many of these system analysis, they often end in reports. So what mechanisms have you seen successfully translate these food system mappings, these food system analysis, with personal scenarios, and implement them into actual policy or investment shifts? Maybe I'll start with you, Just, on this one.
Yeah, great. A wonderful question. I think a lot of benefit comes from doing the analysis process together with those actors that have the potential to make the change. So if you engage in an interactive, participatory way, policymakers and farmers and cooperatives, and together not only do the analysis, but also think about what are these leverage points for change? What are the intervention points? And co-create an agenda for change, a bit similar to what Bram was referring to in his example from Turkana. Yeah, I think then you have a lot of potential to actually change things because you have the people in the room that together can make the change. And I think what often also happens is that you write a nice food system analysis report and it ends up in a drawer. And I think, our experience of organizing sort of these multi-stakeholder facilitated processes over a longer period of time, that really enables you to do both the system analysis as well as looking, okay, what are the potential futures that you could work towards, as well as making very concrete what are the first steps that you could take as a group to take action on a specific topic. And another thing that is important to that is being very clear about your boundaries, because what you often also see with food system analysis is that the boundaries are so broad that everyone in the room is talking about something different. But what we also witnessed is that sometimes focusing on a particular challenge within the food system can help to also bring more focus, or looking at a specific locality like Lake Turkana, that is a very clear boundary of the food system. And that really helps you to also then have the right actors in the room that have enough common ground and maybe enough already existing relations with each other that they can really start creating agenda that they can start working on the next day.
Maybe just to, if I can chip in, I mean, this is exactly what we would like to be doing. And I think this is some of the things that are both sort of an opportunity as well as some of the challenges we're seeing in this domain, is that we've seen people increasingly understand food systems and use the food systems language, but at the same time, the risk is that the complexity becomes paralyzing, right? So it becomes in such a way so big that you don't know exactly where to start, right? And I think that's one of the things that we're probably seeing on different fronts. And then again, there's also a lot of nice examples of how things are actually how actually people do use this to shape policies and do use this to shape investments. And I think, in the past, one of the examples I used to call out as a good example was the EU farm to fork policy, which is really a food systems policy, right? Unfortunately, it's a bit hamstrung now by the changes in politics in the European Union. But then again, it is an example of how you could sort of come up with a comprehensive policy agenda that's based on food systems. And I think a lot of countries are actually shaping this much further and much more in detail. I mean, in Kenya, for instance, I think there was some really interesting gains being made around the whole agroecology strategy that the government was embracing, right? And that's also, in a way, some of the things that are now possible because people are understanding food systems better, right? It opens space for alternative paradigms. It opens space for regenerative approaches and different approaches to food. So I think that's another element. And I think on the investment front, you need food systems analysis and foresight nowadays because it's just too uncertain. If you want to, build a factory somewhere, and you want to sort of have any sort of global supply chain, you will need to sort of think ahead, right? Because the investment is just too big for you to make. And because of the fact that things are connected even more than they were, decades ago, you will need different ways of thinking and you will need different ways of making decisions. And that's where food systems and forward only becomes more relevant. So the same for this Lake Turkana thing, right? You can do the same old thing and you can build a fish processing facility on the shore of Lake Turkana. But you can then look and see that in the past, 3 or 4 different of those factories have been built, right? One fell into disrepair, another one was flooded. I mean, those things we could repeat over and over again, but we need different ways of thinking. And this is one of the ways in which you can make your investment also more resilient into the future.
Oh, thank you, Joost and Bram, for these elaborate answers. The next question is a bit related to it, and I think yes, you have touched upon it a bit already. It's a question related to boundaries. I see it coming back many times in our comment sections, but also in people trying to link the systems thinking and connecting everything to also making sure your boundary is small enough so it becomes, you remain the overview and doesn't become too big. So how do we decide which boundaries we choose in our food system analysis? And it can be both geographical boundaries, administrative boundaries, time boundaries, or money boundaries. Because another question that's linked to this is from Annabelle Poulert. She's saying, what is a realistic time investment to conduct a proper food system analysis? What is a proper food system analysis in that context as well? So it's about how do we choose how broad or how big to go with the food system analysis, and how do we kind of zoom out and zoom back in our food system analysis?
Yeah, great question. I think for a food system analysis, it really depends on the purpose and also the scope of the food system, how much time and budget you need. And I think even if you do a more compact analysis, you can already get some very useful insights. So I've been involved in processes where you take over a year to create a food system analysis with different participatory workshops and a lot of stakeholders involved. But I've also been involved in processes where you take 3 meetings over the course of 3 weeks, where you have a small group of key experts and some informed interviews that together create the process. And that also can already be very useful. I think how you build it up also just really depends on how big of the challenge is that you want to address. So I think we have been looking into food system transformation policy in Uganda in a very broad sense, looking at a lot of different themes. But we've also been looking at Lake Turkana for a much more smaller locality in Kenya. We have been looking at very specific food system challenges around food loss and waste in the horticulture sector in a specific country. So it really depends where you put the boundaries. And I think it really depends in what for organization you're working, what kind of challenge you want to address by doing this analysis. If it's informing a very localized small program somewhere, or whether you really want to influence policy on a national or even regional level. that sort of kind of categories really make a difference in how much resources you need and how many people you need to involve to do it well.
Maybe just to, if I can add, Bram, the boundary of the system is always going to be in a certain way artificial, right? So you can always, have systems within systems, right? So it's also a bit of a co-creation with, the different stakeholders that you can or you have the capacity to involve, and that's a combination of purpose, scope, urgency. Particular things will help you to come up with a boundary, and then that boundary will generally also then be agreed upon by the stakeholders that you can convene, right? So, and that then also ties into what Jess was saying, that you could work across skills. And then obviously you will then also still need to keep in mind that there will be factors or drivers or trends that will influence your system or your unit of analysis, you could say. But you will always need to recalibrate that in a way, and this also ties in with things like bioregioning or other things. It's a bit artificial in a way.
Yeah, but maybe to make it smaller, I mean, you can do a food system analysis using some of the tools that we have provided in our online toolbox with a diverse group within your own organization. That's possible. You can do it within a program or project team with a broader group of stakeholders. But there you might need a bit more facilitation support and maybe some research support. And of course, you can have a full-fledged process organized by a research partner like Wageningen or Oxford, and have a much longer process with much more facilitation and resources, and more in-depth insight. So there's very different ways you can do it, but I wouldn't hesitate from first starting small and see what you can do in your own organization just in a afternoon workshop of a couple of hours with the tools that we already available. I think there's a lot possible with just making a small start.
Maybe, can we talk about power? Because I saw some questions that are sort of, in a way, asking about it. I was really interested. There were a lot of people mentioning it.
Yeah,
I
please.
think, yeah, there was mention about political economy and power dynamics, and I think we haven't mentioned it so much, but maybe it will come up in the course. I think the notion of lock-ins and power lock-ins is increasingly becoming an important issue. This idea basically entails that, and this also relates to the conditions of systems change. It's basically saying that the system, or at least many people in the system, want to change, but it's held back by a particular established group of people. And then you can think about it in terms of a regime that's in place, which is also related to certain ways in which things are done. But I think what's increasingly important in the fact, in the work of food system transformation, is that we need to start really unlocking some of the things that are keeping the system from changing, right? So I think in the Netherlands, there's a similar situation, right? So there's plenty of reasons why the system needs to change, and there's willingness to do it, but there's particular, embedded interests and sort of ways of working that are stopping the system from changing, and that also goes for the way we are, there's a fossil fuel system in place that needs to be sort of dislodged before a new system can take its place, right? So I think that awareness of political economy and the awareness of power is absolutely crucial, and thereby I think also it's important to realize that if you're in a food system space and you're getting into the food systems work, you will also in a way become more political, and you will need to become less objective, and also realizing that things have a certain weight and sort of implications, and I think it's also good to be aware of that if you're really using a food systems perspective.
I think there's a nice perspective from choices have to be made, and there's always reasoning and a thinking behind the choices is always related. Also, I've seen questions on how do traditional values and culture and religion come into that. It's also based on choices and historical events and things that are happening. So that's a great addition. I see we have 2 minutes left, so I would like to finalize with one question, maybe a bit of a critical question towards food system analysis. And that is, what do you see as the core limitation of current food system analysis? And what is needed to overcome these shortcomings in the future? Maybe I'll start with Just.
Yeah, great question. I think I would say the main limitation is that you don't want it to be a purely academic exercise. So it's nice to involve researchers in the process, but how I look at the future of assessing food systems and its relation with actually developing change agendas is that I hope that in future more people will do this type of analysis within their own agenda in a small way. Um, it's nice to have some research support and have interaction between researchers on the one hand and people working in private sector on the other, or maybe in an NGO or civil society. But it shouldn't be a purely academic exercise. And sometimes it's that. And I think both Bram and I are very enthusiastic about making it the research part of a broader change process where we have multiple stakeholders on board and where it's really about co-creating a change agenda and not just about producing a report that ends up in a drawer.
A great response. Thank you. Yes. Bram.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what Jus was saying. I'll say something a little bit different. I was thinking of, yeah, one of the comments made in the chat. Duco Bosco was saying it. How can people with, groups with limited funds, apply this concept? And I recognize it also from working in NGO, right? So there's a lot of constraints and a lot of challenges as to, how do you actually sort of, build the capacities, invest the time, get into that sort of network and facilitate that while you're also struggling to get funds. And I think that's one of the big challenges and paradoxes, right? How do you do this? And then the answer to me, I think, is in a way that it needs to you need to start proactively thinking about knowing the context in which you're working and also being open and versatile, right? So being willing to also change the way you do things. And I think that's the challenge that we need to invest in somehow. And I don't see that easily arising now with constraints in terms of also the whole international development space. So that's what I do worry about. Then again, I do think that it's really hopeful that a lot of people are interested in this approach and this way of thinking.
Thank you, Bram. And if I can add something small to it as well, what I often realize is that people often make it too big and then they go into an analysis paralysis. And what I often realize is really helpful if you start working with systems thinking is to make it really concrete. See, okay, what is the issue? Who is affected by it? Who is affecting the issue? Okay, what are some of its drivers? And you slowly zoom out to see what it's linked to, and then you zoom back in. Okay, now can we best intervene? Where we have an entry points for change. So really start small, create these relatively small boundaries, and then move on from that instead of starting too big and then don't know. There's too many factors that influence it, so then you don't know where to start, and then you become kind of in that paralysis. So that often helps if you're working on a specific issue or a specific case, and these tools help you in having that process and doing it together with a group. By that, I would like to close this session. I would like to thank Bram Peters and Joost Dengerink for joining us, and also Miriam and Floris for helping in co-hosting this Zoom session, and for all of you for your nice questions. Thank you all for now. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.